Norm Miller, the CD player, immediately to kill my father, and the incel operation. Norm Miller, because he got caught arguing with me at 10 years old about how if I ever became a cop, that he was going to be the police chief and that he would never, or I would never be able to have as much power as him. And that he would, I guess I could say, never be willing to give me immunity. Well, when I got caught stealing that CD player, because they already dropped for a few theft things that I had, and they weren't busting me because John Berg was telling them not to, my parents had to come and pick me up. I used the name Tyler Miller. That is what I went under until Norm Miller caught me, and I told him my name was Chad Boom. He called my parents to come and pick me up. Well, during that, the CD player back and the stuff I stole from Fred Byers, but not the stuff I stole from high school pharmacies. He had a conversation with my father and my mother about how I was going to have immunity and he was going to train me. He told my father right to his face that he was going to kill him with that immunity. And that what it was for. Why? Because Nolan Borders was accused by Berg of being an incel. And Officer Varick, Officer Doug Carpenter, and Officer Norm Miller were asked by John Berg to set up Nolan Borders for being an incel. So in return, they waited until Gaynor came because they had information that a guy was going to be like Gaynor, get volunteered to get trained. So they trained him to be the replacement incel, i.e. the replacement killer. In retrospective, you could say Nolan Borders jacking off to contracts and investigations is fucked up. You could say that Dennis Varick hiding it and playing DEA operative and Doug Carpenter playing detective is fucked up. But what you can find is that Norm Miller didn't have a wife. He didn't have kids. He didn't have any of that shit that the other guys had. Even Nolan Borders had more of a life. Jacking off to kids, apparently. But Norm Miller didn't. Norm Miller had every reason to use those contracts and convince the government that as police chief, he could have immunity, grant immunity to his officers and other agencies if they help in the incel investigation. After they found out the rape cases couldn't be used for that, they turned that into the Charlie Manson human trafficking investigation. And then they used the Timothy McVeigh incel study investigation to continue on to protect those three officers, Nolan Borders, Norm Miller, and Officer Gaynor, from the actual incel setup that was bribed to the Scappoose police station to set up their own cops with. And they thought this was a fun game to play with me, selling heroin to kids inside of the school, using my broken kneecap to get pills that I never got to deal those pills. Now, you would find why Norm Miller was so infatuated with that crime org book I written and Avante keeping me down here with Chris Peterman, because their kidnapping of me down here is for Chris Peterman's defense of Karen Fabiano for the incel thing, to protect Nolan Borders, to protect Norm Miller, and then arrest Officer Gaynor for John Berg for creating an incel killer that was terrorizing a town just like John Berg always wanted to go after Brian Kohberger, and he had his man, Officer Troy Gaynor.